Good morning. I'm Don Dickey, a member of this congregation, and it is my privilege to welcome you here on an absolutely gorgeous day, sandwiched in between the rain and sleet and snow. And it's also Super Bowl Sunday. I mean, would have been great weather to have it here. And rest assured, I have been thoroughly chastised for not wearing red. Okay, we set aside this time to welcome the guests and visitors here. And do we have any members who have brought a guest? And if so, please stand. Let us know their name and where they're from. Do we have any visitors who would be comfortable standing and letting us know your name?
Hi.
Yes.
I brought some guests. My brother James and my sister-in-law Carol are here from Florida to share the Super Bowl with us, so we're really...
Well, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
I'm Chris Shapley, and this is my son Pete. I'm visiting from the Eureka Springs UUF, and Pete is my second generation UU.
Awesome. Okay, well, welcome. Anyone else? Okay, in honor of the Chiefs playing today, after the service, we're going to have our own tailgating party down in Conover. Those of you who are guests or visitors, please let the people know, the cashier, that you are a visitor. There's no charge. You are truly our guest today.
Oh
Okay, so this has been a heavy week for many of us. The political news is profoundly disappointing. That it is unsurprising is only a further invitation to despair. Everyone wants to know, what can we do? Call our senators. Yes, we did that. It didn't work. By which we mean our side didn't win. We want to know, what can we do so that our side will win? Vote. Call on other people to vote. Register voters. You cannot now be unaware of the consequences of not voting. Yes, we will do that, but not for months and months yet. We want to know, what can we do so that our side will win right now? And I ask you this. Can you sit with that question for a few moments and begin to hear how it is the voice of unconscious privilege? How it assumes that we who know we are right should get what we want because we are used to it, because we are right. With no expenditure of patience or faith or resilience or persistence. I invite you to consider that no meaningful moral victory or liberation has ever been accomplished in the history of this nation or this world merely by being right. Being right is necessary, but never sufficient. Determination and commitment and strategy and guts and sacrifice are also required. Which is why we are here, because that is what church is about. Church is about finding the commitment and the courage and the companionship to withstand how long it sometimes takes for the arc of history to bend toward justice, and how much bitter disappointment we must endure along the way. Church is about not giving up, not letting each other give up, about not letting go of the good we said we believed in once on an easier day. Church is about reminding ourselves of the people we want to be and the world we want to weave together. Church is the place where we practice acting like the people we want to be, living in the world we believe we could build. Church is the place where we remember to be kind and to be grateful, where we remember the beauties of nature and the joys of love, where we remember how to tell stories and how to sing. Here is a thing you can do. It will not make our side win right now. It will not scratch the itch of your rage. It will take energy and time. It is the most radical, foundational, important human thing you can do to defeat the powers we are up against at this turning point of history. This coming Friday at 6:45, come to worship with our friends in Congregation Kol Ami. Come celebrate the birthday of the trees, which the rabbi will tell us about in a moment. Come and weave the web of community tighter with these neighbors who are at risk whenever things get bad like this. Make yourself and all of us ashamed to ever allow harm to come to any of our neighbors while we look away. Connect. Reach out. Make the effort to affirm our common humanity. Connect. Supremacy thrives on separation. Privilege depends on separation. Prejudice and persecution and hatred and evil and lies all flourish only where connection has failed. Church is about connection. Build connections. Connections bring down walls and tyrannies. We light this chalice flame in honor of all the connections that nurture us in body and spirit. For the seasons of the year and the interdependent web of nature, including groundhogs. For neighbors and friends and families and teams. For histories of struggle and survival and enduring hope. May we seek ever to deepen our connections to one another and to the creative source.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sean, and I light this chalice for the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Now let's rise in body and spirit and join together in our opening hymn and then our words of covenant. again the words of our covenant promise to this community. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now, as the rest of us are seated, our children are invited to their classes with song. Now I invite you to welcome with me my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Doug Alpert of Congregation Kol Ami.
Good morning, everybody. First, grateful beyond words, and it's been an ongoing for years, the feeling of gratitude that I and my folks, Congregation Kol Ami, have for my dear friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. Kendyl Gibbons, and all of you here at All Souls for giving us home, making us feel welcome, making us feel connected, and never making us feel really like guests. I am going to talk about Tu B'Shvat this morning. I'm going to talk of the Jewish holiday known as the Birthday of the Trees. I'm going to talk a little bit about our community garden and some words about relationship in between those two. But first, I feel compelled to have a short explanation of my attire this morning. Yes, the red is very much in the spirit of the day. The truth is I don't own a Chiefs t-shirt per se, but I did feel the need to wear something in red. You could see this as merely an excuse just to not have to put on a tie this morning, and you would be absolutely right. But I don't know if you can see it. The shirt is, I got it in Hawaii, and it was like I could not buy it. It is a kind of a Jewish caricature, and combining the greetings from the traditional Hawaiian and traditional Judaism, shalom and aloha becomes shaloha. There is a philosophical basis for this in that I think if you're going to run the risk of demeaning someone's culture, it ought to be your own. And I don't do the chop. This is somebody who grew up on the Kansas City Chiefs and went to most of the games at the old Municipal Stadium. Wouldn't be such a big deal to change the name. So with that, a little bit about Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the literal translation. The tu part is actually two Hebrew letters which have a numerical equivalent of 15. So it's literally the 15th day of the month of Shvat. And Tu B'Shvat is the birthday of the trees, and by birthday I mean it's tax day for fruit growers. So yeah, happy birthday, fruit grower. Now give us some money. And why does it occur during the 15th day of Shvat or during this time of year? Well, it was seen as kind of the day in which the first almond trees blossomed. So it was this, even though we're kind of in the dead of winter, it was this first sign of transformation. And since it's a time when things are relatively dormant, it kind of gives God a good amount of space and time to evaluate whether we've been good or not, and whether we ought to get a good growth of trees, of fruit trees and fruit in the coming year. There's a lot of history of Tu B'Shvat in between this idea of tithing or taxing to the present. I'm going to kind of fast forward to something closer to the present, which is think in terms of the ecology movement, kind of the growth of it in the late 60s, early 70s, and this holiday, which didn't resonate so much for a lot of years, had a kind of its own resurgence during that period of kind of politically liberal Judaism and Jews. And it has kind of retained its popularity until this day. So what I want to really talk about for a second is about relationship between us as human beings and nature and God, for however you define God in your own way. And there are three different ways, at least within our Torah, our sacred text, to kind of characterize these relationships. The first is in Genesis. And if you think of the story of Adam and Eve, and they got one lousy rule, and they can't keep the one lousy rule, which is don't eat from the tree of knowledge. What happens? What's their punishment? They get banished from the garden. They actually, you can see it as punishment, but there's some discussion, and it's an article by Rabbi Jeff Salter, in which it is not so much punishment or a curse, but a return to rightful relationships. So the idea being that human beings, when they got more control over nature, when they were more dominating nature, they were further away from God, and God kind of inserted a readjustment period. So it happened with the Adam and Eve story. It's going to happen again with the Noah story, with the flood, which kind of is a big do-over of the earth. And it also happens with the Tower of Babel, where literally they try and control and reach for the heavens, and it does not turn out well, as you know. Also, in terms of relationship of us and nature, the word for human being, Adam, the first human being, is also the word Adamah, is the word for earth or ground. So they are more than just a little bit connected. So that's the first kind of depiction of relationship amongst the players. The second is in the book of Deuteronomy, in which we are given a plethora of commandments, rules to follow. And when we follow those rules, and it says so in the book, good things happen. We get rain for our crops. When we don't follow, curses on you, and your crops will dry up, and the land will be parched. So God actually becomes somewhat of a reactor versus an actor in the story. God reacts to human beings, so human beings have the primary role, and they're the primary drivers of what happens in nature by their own conduct and really how they treat each other, in addition to how they approach or treat nature. The third piece comes from wisdom literature, which is right at the Proverbs, Psalms, Book of Job, Book of Esther, Song of Songs, all of which comes at a time when it's immediately after the destruction of the first temple in the year 586 before the Common Era. And so it's bleak times, and God seems absent in those moments. So it is these pieces of wisdom literature are really a pushback on human arrogance. So they instruct us to really study nature to get the lessons we need to learn. There's one piece in Proverbs about, you lazy bones, study the ants, look at the way they work. I know this because my wife is like infatuated with carpenter ants and could spend an hour. We were in the Amazon. She literally stopped on the trail, and we had to spend a half hour looking at ants. So I know this is true. And in a sense, it gives us a backseat role to nature, and it kind of puts us in our place at a time when I think we probably need to be put in our place. Which leads me to the idea of relationship in our community garden. If you don't know, our community garden is located between 43rd and 42nd Street, between Forest and Tracy. When we moved out of our building on the Kansas side and found this wonderful place to become renters and so much more, we had a garden in our own building, and my people who loved to garden said, we want a garden. And in looking for a garden, I was fully supportive. I said, the one rule is it's got to be east of Troost. And so this is where we landed. Forest is 1 block east of Troost. And over the years, this garden has grown dramatically. No thanks to me. If you want anything to grow, I am not your guy. But it has a rejuvenating section now that in a couple of years will kind of be its own growth spurt, more fruit trees than we've had. We've got chickens in the garden now. It's a wondrous place. But for me, and actually even for those who love to garden, it's really about connecting with people, not us. It's putting us in space with people we otherwise would not meet. And I think that's the important piece. So in a way, we're by connecting with nature in this garden, we're reacquiring our relationship with God and reacquiring our relationship with each other. And I'll just give one brief example. In 2014, across the street from the garden, a woman, Teresa Kellogg, was a victim of gun violence. And we had just happened to have a Shabbat worship service scheduled for the following Saturday morning. It turned into a time and place for the neighborhood to come together, including the father and the son of the victim, to grieve together, to be together in relationship together. This is something we never would have envisioned when we started the garden, but it has those kinds of benefits of connecting and strengthening interpersonal relationship. Much in the same way that just the mere idea of us looking for space to rent in 2012 led us to this wonderful relationship with All Souls that we have now. And when we come here, we connect with you, and it feels like we're connecting with God as well. So with that, amongst the things about which you show your generosity, apparently this morning and the following Sunday, part of the offering is going to go to the community garden. I can't tell you how grateful we are for that, and know that knowing that some of the money that's going into the garden is your money, we take that very seriously and committed to putting it to good use, to again strengthening not just the growth of the garden itself, but strengthening the relationships that come out of it. Thank you so much.
In this spirit, this morning's offering will now be given and gratefully received. Will you join me now in the words of dedication for our offering? We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society. In his poetry, Robert Frost urges us that when the mob is swayed to carry praise or blame too far, we may choose something like a star to stay our minds on and be stayed. After this train wreck of a week and month, I'm going to suggest trees. Big, durable, seemingly silent trees, standing bare through the frozen winter, renewing their leaves and fruit, patiently scrubbing carbon out of the air and returning oxygen, offering friendly shade from the summer sun, presenting us with apples and almonds and peaches and pecans, many outliving multiple human generations. Trees that even after their own deaths give us fire and furniture and canoes and the structure of homes and the material of art. With the assistance of biology professor and Native American teacher Robin Wall Kimmerer, let us join our Jewish neighbors and turn from our assorted heartbreak to rest our spirits in the contemplation of trees.
Nut trees don't make a crop every year, but rather produce at unpredictable intervals. Some years a feast, most years a famine, a boom and bust cycle known as massed fruiting. Unlike juicy fruits and berries, which invite you to eat them right away before they spoil, nuts protect themselves with a hard, almost stony shell and a green, leathery husk. The tree does not mean for you to eat at them right away with juice dripping down your chin. They are designed to be food for winter, when you need fat and protein, heavy calories to keep you warm. They are safety for hard times, the embryo of survival. So rich is the reward that the contents are protected in a vault, double locked, box inside a box. This protects the embryo within and its food supply, but it also virtually guarantees that the nut will be squirreled away someplace safe. Nuts are designed to be brought inside, to save for later in a chipmunk's cache or in the root cellar of an Oklahoma cabin. In the way of all hoards, some will surely be forgotten, and then a tree is born.
The nut trees teach us that not all nourishing is immediate. Some of the provision we would make for the future must be hidden now and discovered later, a stealth legacy. Whether it becomes food for the barren winter or a seedling that survives long storage to take root at a favorable time, we must invest in a trusted future that we may not actually see. Hide a copy of the Constitution among your mystery novels. Its time may come again. Review the Gettysburg Address that you once memorized. Somewhere among your computer files, download the words and music to Hamilton. Teach Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, to your grandchildren. Give copies of Thomas Paine's Common Sense as stocking stuffers at Christmas. Post Langston Hughes's Let America Be America Again on your Facebook timeline. Leave printouts of Washington's and Eisenhower's farewell addresses among the magazines at your dentist's office. Get a reputation as a cranky advocate for old school democracy. Offer to teach civics to your nephew's scout troop. Make it an ongoing project to describe what the common good means to you and update regularly. Sing protest songs. They carry the kernel of freedom like the curled heart of a walnut. Hide the legacy of liberty everywhere in plain sight so that people have to keep tripping over it. The trees know. You don't have to announce yourself as the biggest, hugest winner. You just have to conceal the ideas where others will come across them and be intrigued when conditions are more favorable.
For mass fruiting to succeed in generating new forests, each tree has to make lots and lots of nuts. So many that it overwhelms the would-be seed predators. If a tree just plodded along, making a few nuts every year, they'd all get eaten and there would be no next generation of pecans. But given the high caloric value of nuts, the trees can't afford this outpouring every year. They have to save up for it, as a family saves up for a special event. Mass fruiting trees spend years making sugar, and rather than spending a little by little, they stick it under the proverbial mattress, banking calories as starch in their roots. When the account has a surplus, only then can people and animals gather pounds of nuts to store away. Forest ecologists hypothesize that mass fruiting is the simple outcome of this energetic equation. Make fruit only when you can afford it. That makes sense.
But trees grow and accumulate calories at different rates depending on their habitats. So the fortunate ones would get rich quickly and fruit often, while their shaded neighbors would struggle and only rarely have abundance, waiting for years to produce. If this were true, each tree would fruit on its own schedule, predictable by the size of its reserves of stored starch. But they don't. If one tree fruits, they all fruit. There are no soloists. Not one tree in a grove, but the whole grove. Not one grove in the forest, but every grove. All across the county, all across the state. The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we do not know yet. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual.
This is the wisdom of the trees. All flourishing is mutual. It's not Darwin's fault. He wasn't wrong. We just willfully misread him. Darwin theorized about the fitness of the species to its environment, which includes how the individual members cooperate to make the best possible use of resources, as well as how the species as a whole contributes to the flourishing of the larger environment, and how it creates mutually beneficial connections with other creatures so that they might also thrive. There is no such thing as self-sufficiency. We as human beings are nowhere without the bees to pollinate the fruits we love, and the dung beetles to process our waste products, and the 300 to 500 types of bacteria that enable us to digest food into the nutrients that keep us alive. Any political system which claims that some set of individuals can benefit indefinitely at the expense of all others, or can extract and consume resources without returning value to the whole, is an idolatrous lie. Any creature that does not have a way to neutralize the toxins it produces will ultimately poison itself. We think that accountability for our selfish or toxic actions is a choice, but the trees know better. We can bring death upon others and ourselves single-handedly, but all flourishing is mutual and collective if it is to be sustainable.
In the summer of 1895, the root cellars throughout Indian Territory were full of pecans, and so were the bellies of boys and squirrels. For people, the pulse of abundance felt like a gift, a profusion of food to be simply picked up from the ground. That is, if you got there before the squirrels. And if you didn't, at least there would be lots of squirrel stew that winter. The pecan grove gives and gives again.
Such communal generosity might seem incompatible with the process of evolution, which invokes the imperative of individual survival. But we make a grave error if we do not try to separate individual well-being from the health of the whole. The gift of abundance from the pecans is also a gift to themselves. By sating squirrels and people, the trees are ensuring their own survival. The genes that translate mass fruiting flow on evolutionary currents into the next generations, while those that lack the ability to participate will be eaten and reach an evolutionary dead end. Just so, people who know how to read the land for nuts and carry them home to safety will survive the February blizzards and pass that behavior on to their progeny, not by genetic transmission, but by cultural practice.
This is both our gift and our challenge as human beings. We need not await the slow forces of evolutionary shift. We can create change by shaping culture. We can learn. We can, at the very least, offer our hard-won wisdom to the next generation by example and by teaching. We can tell stories about how the world works and what happens when selfishness seeks its own narrow good, or when nobility makes a sacrifice for the well-being of all. What the trees know in their patient growth, ring by ring, we must learn in the midst of our hasty seeking here and there, that to live for the individual self alone is a dead end, and it is only by cooperation that we make viable progeny to take the places that we must one day leave empty. For they, no less than we, will require an interdependent web of connections. They, no less than we, will thrive only in cooperation and relationship. It seems to me that the processes of democracy are like mast fruiting, which only succeeds if all participate. Few of us can send our knowledge forward in time alone, undefended, uniquely brilliant. Few of us can sway the present with our individual protest. We will be picked off one by one, overwhelmed by the greed of supremacy for control. It is only by the constant coordinated practice of human rights, where when one is challenged, we all respond, where there are too many insisting on our fundamental freedoms for all to be consumed, that those freedoms can be secured for the future.
The pecan trees and their kin show a capacity for concerted action, for unity of purpose that transcends the individual trees. They ensure somehow that all stand together and thus survive. How they do this is still elusive. There is some evidence that certain cues from the environment may trigger fruiting, like a particularly wet spring or a long growing season. These favorable conditions help all the trees achieve an energy surplus that they can spend on nuts. But given the individual differences in habitat, it seems unlikely that environment alone could be the key to synchrony.
In the old times, our elders say, the trees talked to each other. They'd stand in their own council and craft a plan. But scientists decided long ago that plants were deaf and mute, locked in isolation without communication. The possibility of conversation was summarily dismissed. Science pretends to be purely rational, completely neutral, a system of knowledge-making in which the observation is independent of the observer. And yet the conclusion was drawn that plants cannot communicate because they lack the mechanisms that animals use to speak. Until quite recently, no one seriously explored the possibility that plants might speak to one another. But pollen has been carried reliably on the wind for eons, communicated by males to receptive females to make those very nuts. If the wind can be trusted with that fecund responsibility, why not with messages?
Consider that it will not be until this coming August 31st that we will reach the 100th anniversary of the first public radio newscast. And even an effective electrical telegraph is less than 2 centuries old. The World Wide Web of internet communication on which we now so much rely has come into existence within the lifetimes of many in this room. It is perhaps not surprising that so many generations of human scientists were unable to perceive the options that plants might use to talk to each other. Vocalization and systems derived from speech, such as writing, represent only one of many possible forms of communication. We've been hearing a lot about conspiracies lately. The roots of the word suggest that it is a breathing together, which is something the trees do. It is what we must do now too, we who believe in freedom, in equal justice and the rule of law, in compassion, diversity, character, honor, and facts. We must first remember to breathe. That is not optional. We must keep going one foot in front of the other and be aware that we are not alone. Survival in the long run is not a solo project, not for the trees and not for us. The only way out is through, and the only way through is together.
There is now compelling evidence that our elders were right. The trees are talking to one another. They communicate via pheromones, hormone-like compounds that are wafted on the breeze, laden with meaning. Scientists have identified specific compounds that one tree will release when it is under the stress of insect attack. Gypsy moths gorging on its leaves or bark nettles under its skin. The tree sends out a distress call. Hey, you guys over there, I'm under attack here. You might want to raise the drawbridge and arm yourselves for what is coming your way. The downwind trees catch the drift, sensing those few molecules of alarm, the whiff of danger. This gives them time to manufacture defensive chemicals. Forewarned is forearmed. The trees warn each other, and the invaders are repelled. The individual benefits, and so does the entire grove. Trees appear to be talking about mutual defense. could they also communicate to synchronize masting? There is so much we cannot yet sense with our limited human capacity. Tree conversations are still far above our heads.
Some studies of mass fruiting have suggested the mechanism for synchrony comes not through the air, but underground. The trees in a forest are often interconnected by subterranean networks of mycorrhizae, fungal strands that inhabit tree roots. The mycorrhizal symbiosis enables the fungi to forage for mineral nutrients in the soil and deliver them to the tree in exchange for carbohydrates. The mycorrhizae may form fungal bridges between individual trees so that all the trees in the forest are connected. These fungal networks appear to redistribute the wealth of carbohydrates from tree to tree. A kind of Robin Hood they take from the rich and give to the poor so that all the trees arrive at the same carbon surplus at the same time. They weave a web of reciprocity, of giving and taking. In this way, the trees all act as one because the fungi have connected them. Through unity, survival. All flourishing is mutual. Soil, fungus, tree, squirrel, boy. All are beneficiaries of reciprocity.
Through unity, survival. The trees apparently practice redistribution as a way to coordinate the cycles of reproduction that ensure their collective future. Do the healthiest of them make more pecans, perhaps giving them a small statistical edge in the lottery of which nuts might happen to get lost amidst the orgy of consumption? Seems likely. But the larger point is that unless all participate, no one wins. No tree alone, no matter how prolific, can sate the demand. Only all of them together can do that, giving a random handful of nuts the opportunity to get lost in the shuffle and survive to take hold as new trees. There is virtue in thrift. The trees store up their surplus calories until they have enough to overwhelm the environment and have a critical mass survive. If they expended their seasonal gains every year, that would never happen. Yet there is a crucial difference between communal economy and individual hoarding. The trees know what their neighbors need. The mycorrhizae tell them. And it is not until the most successful can spare enough so that all can bear a crop that the massed fruiting signal is given in a propitious year. This was clearly not the month of our collective fruiting for democracy. But in the soil beneath us, the fungi are whispering and the roots are alive. Marge Piercy reminds us, connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the wall. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses, live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out. Keep reaching out. Keep bringing in. Without this work of connection, of kindness, of reaching out, of mutuality. Without this conspiracy, democracy cannot survive across the generations. And this is the breathing together that no tyrant has ever been able to abolish.
How generously they shower us with food, literally giving themselves so that we can live. But in the giving, their lives are also insured. Our taking returns benefit to them in the circle of life, making life, the chain of reciprocity, living by the precepts of the honorable harvest, to take only what is given, to use it well, to be grateful for the gift, and to reciprocate the gift, is easy in a pecan grove. We reciprocate the gift by taking care of the grove, protecting it from harm, planting seeds so that new groves will shade the prairie and feed the squirrels.
The honorable harvest. Is this not a recipe for more than agriculture? Take only what is willingly given. Do not waste it, but use it carefully and beautifully. Acknowledge the debt of gratitude, not only to the immediate giver, but for the abundance of life and the universe. And give back. Pay it forward. Pass your creativity along. Serve the common good in whatever ways you can. We know when we are living in a culture that does not observe the precepts of the honorable harvest. Even from a position of privilege, our spirits can never be at ease in such a community. Better to live like the trees, rooted together, warning each other about predators, sharing the resources that make fruitfulness possible for all. Better to whisper in the winds, to conspire with the fungus, to make sugar out of sunlight and rain, to be part of the living organism of the forest. On this very day, we are at the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Even now, their great web of roots begins to stir in the cold soil. The sap softens in preparation for the warming days. Deep beneath the bark, the buds are forming. Go out into the forests where they stand, patiently abiding the centuries of our arrogance and greed, breathing the planet green. Even now, in the chill and the mud, in their least enchanting moment, and ours too. Choose something like a tree. Quiet your mind enough to hear their conspiracy. Borrow from their ancient strength and take courage. This may not be the moment, but the year of our harvest will surely come. Let's stand and sing together. Thank you. this. How do you balance normalcy against the backdrop of what is taking place in Washington? How do you pack your kids' lunches, make Super Bowl plans, check the air in your car's tires, when the Senate has rubber-stamped the very type of actions our founding fathers most feared could threaten our republic? These are not only questions for our times. In moments of crisis, there's always a struggle between life going on and responding to the import of the moment. Do you fight for what is right, organize, mobilize, pledge an all-out effort at the ballot box? Or do you gather for a neighborhood barbecue, head to the church social, take a walk through the woods with your partner? I believe this cannot be considered a binary option. You do all of those things. Even during World War II, there was still a World Series. Even during Vietnam, there were school plays. Even after 9/11, there was time for coffee with a friend. Many see today an assault on our democracy and on our humanity. To push back against these forces means not giving up on either front. To be sure, fear is a potent tool for autocrats, but so is cynicism. Those who seek to divide us can be held accountable in elections, but they can also be defeated through affirmative acts of kindness. I look out at this great nation and see much that is broken. But I also know that every day, millions upon millions of my fellow citizens set out to lead purposeful lives, to help others, to be empathetic members of their communities. One thing I have seen about this country over my life is that change happens, and it can be dramatic. Most of that change has been for the positive. Step out of the bubble. Turn off the TV, put your phone in a drawer, and take a deep breath. Focus on what is around you, and focus on what needs to be done for the future. Another thing I have seen over my life is that no president is bigger than the country. Some have forgotten that, and the American people have invariably reminded them. Go in peace and power.